Elena Santos pulled her cleaning cart down the long, fancy hallway of the Montclair Hotel, the wheels squeaking slightly against the polished marble floor. The sound echoed in the empty corridor as she checked her schedule for the day. 6 luxury suites, 2 meeting rooms, and the grand ballroom needed cleaning before her shift ended at 4. She sighed as she tucked a loose strand of dark hair back into her neat bun. Another long day, but she was grateful for the work. The pay was decent, and the manager, Mr. Chen, was fair with the scheduling. Most of the wealthy guests barely noticed her anyway, which made the job easier. Just another person in a uniform, blending into the background of their lavish lives. "Good morning, Elena," called out Nora from the linen room, her friendly face appearing around the doorway. "How was your weekend?" Elena smiled at her coworker. "Quiet. Spent it with my mother. We watched those old movies she loves." She didn't mention the hours spent helping her mom with physical therapy exercises or counting out the pills that kept her pain at bay. "How about yours?" "Oh, the usual chaos with 3 kids," Nora laughed. "Never a dull moment." They chatted for a few more minutes before Elena continued her rounds. The suites were all standard cleanups. Beds made with fresh linens, towels replaced, surfaces dusted, and floors vacuumed. Nothing out of the ordinary except for room 412, where someone had apparently decided to use the desk chair as an ashtray, despite the hotel's strict no-smoking policy. Elena made a note to tell Mr. Chen about the burn marks. By the time she reached the grand ballroom, it was already past noon. Her shoulders ached slightly as she pushed her cart through the enormous double doors. The ballroom was Elena's favorite place to clean in the entire hotel. Unlike the stuffy suites with their identical furniture and predictable messes, the ballroom felt alive with invisible echoes of celebrations and music. The room was quiet now, bathed in soft natural light streaming through tall windows. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, catching sunbeams and scattering tiny rainbows across the walls. Elena paused for a moment, taking in the peaceful grandeur before getting to work. She was halfway through mopping the vast floor when her eyes drifted to the corner of the room. There it stood, a magnificent grand piano, its polished black surface gleaming like a mirror. The hotel kept it there for special events, wedding receptions, and the occasional concert. Elena glanced at her watch. She was making good time with her tasks. Surely she could spare just a minute or two. Setting her mop aside, she walked slowly toward the piano, drawn to it like a magnet. Her steps were hesitant, almost reverent, as if she were approaching something sacred. The ballroom was empty. No one would know. When she reached the piano, she gently ran her fingertips along its smooth edge, feeling the cool, polished wood beneath her skin. How many talented musicians had played this beautiful instrument? How many melodies had danced from its strings into this very air? She carefully lifted the fallboard covering the keys, revealing the perfect row of black and white ivories. They seemed to invite her touch, promising secrets and stories if only she would listen. Unknown to Elena, a man had entered the ballroom through a side door. Alexander Blackwood paused when he noticed someone by the piano. He'd come to check the space for an investor gala he was hosting later that week, but finding it occupied, he stepped back into the shadow of the doorway, irritated by the interruption. He was about to call out to the cleaner to leave when something about her demeanor caught his attention. The way she stood before the instrument wasn't just casual curiosity. There was something almost worshipful in her posture. It amused him. Elena sat down slowly on the bench, smoothing her uniform skirt. Her hand hovered over the keys for a long moment before she allowed herself to touch one, pressing it so gently that it barely made a sound. A soft, high C note whispered into the empty ballroom. From his vantage point, Alexander watched with growing interest. The cleaning woman was clearly entranced by the piano, treating it with the kind of awe that someone like her might feel toward such an expensive instrument. In his world, pianos were commonplace. His own Manhattan apartment featured a custom Steinway that he'd purchased more as a statement piece than for any musical appreciation. Elena pressed another key, then another, not playing anything specific, just feeling the weight of the keys under her fingers. It had been so long since she'd touched a piano this fine. Each key responded perfectly to even the lightest pressure. Alexander's lips curled into a slight smirk. There was something almost childlike about watching this simple woman experimenting with the piano, as if she'd discovered some magical object. Probably never had music lessons a day in her life, he thought. Likely grew up without such luxuries. Elena glanced nervously over her shoulder, making sure she was still alone, unaware of the man watching from the shadows. Seeing no one, she turned back to the piano. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and then she didn't play. Instead, she carefully closed the fallboard over the keys and stood up. Her break was over and she had work to finish. The piano would wait for someone worthy of its music, someone invited to play it, not a housekeeper stealing moments during her shift. As she walked back to her cleaning cart, Alexander stepped fully into the room, intrigued by what he'd witnessed. The woman noticed him immediately and froze. "Sir, I'm sorry," she said quickly, her eyes widening with worry. I didn't. No harm done," Alexander replied smoothly, studying her with cool interest. She was perhaps in her early 30s with warm brown eyes and an anxious expression. Nothing remarkable about her appearance except for the care with which she had approached the piano. "Do you play?" he asked, gesturing toward the instrument. Elena hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "I used to. A little," she answered vaguely, already reaching for her mop. "I'm sorry if I was in your way, sir." "Not at all." Alexander smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was something calculating in his gaze that made Elena uncomfortable. "I'm Alexander Blackwood. I'm hosting an event here tomorrow evening." "Yes, sir. Mr. Chen mentioned we should have everything perfect for your party." She busied herself with her cleaning supplies, hoping he would leave so she could finish her work. "And your name is?" he prompted. "Elena. Elena Santos." "Well, Elena Santos," he said, taking a few steps closer to the piano. "Perhaps you'd like to play something for real sometime, rather than just touching the keys." There was a note in his voice that Elena couldn't quite place. Not exactly mockery, but something adjacent to it, as if he found the very idea amusing. "Oh no, sir, that wouldn't be appropriate." She shook her head firmly. "I'm just here to clean." Alexander nodded, seeming to lose interest. "Of course. Well, don't let me keep you from your duties." He turned his attention to his phone, effectively dismissing her. Elena quickly finished mopping the floor, uncomfortable with his presence, but too professional to leave the job unfinished. As she worked, Alexander wandered around the ballroom, occasionally making notes on his phone, planning the layout for his gathering. When she finally pushed her cart toward the exit, he called after her. "Oh, Elena?" She paused, turning back reluctantly. "Yes, sir?" "What kind of music did you use to play? On the piano, I mean." His tone was casual, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made her uneasy. "Classical mostly," she answered simply, not wanting to elaborate. "Interesting." Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly as an idea began to form in his mind. "Very interesting." Elena nodded politely and left, pulling her cart behind her. Something about the exchange left her feeling unsettled, but she pushed the feeling aside. Rich guests often acted strangely around the staff. It meant nothing. By tomorrow, he'd have forgotten all about her. But as Alexander stood alone in the ballroom looking thoughtfully at the grand piano, he was already planning something that would ensure tomorrow would be a day Elena Santos wouldn't soon forget. A small, cruel smile played at the corners of his mouth as he imagined the scene. His sophisticated friends, expensive champagne flowing, and the look on this simple cleaning woman's face when he called her out to entertain them. It would be amusing, he thought, a little social experiment. After all, what was the point of wealth and power if you couldn't have a bit of fun with it occasionally? He made a mental note to speak with the hotel manager. Mr. Blackwood would need a special addition to his guest list for tomorrow night's party. The next evening, Elena finished her shift and hurried toward the staff exit. Her feet ached after a particularly long day, and she was looking forward to a quiet dinner with her mother. She had just swiped her time card when Mr. Chen's voice called out behind her. "Elena, wait a moment, please." She turned, surprised to see not only Mr. Chen but also the hotel's general manager, Mr. Patel, approaching with serious expressions. A knot formed in her stomach. Had someone complained about her work? Was it about yesterday when she'd touched the piano? "Is everything okay?" she asked, clutching her bag tighter. Mr. Chen looked uncomfortable. "There's been a request from Mr. Blackwood." Mr. Patel stepped forward. "The gentleman hosting the event in the penthouse suite tonight has specifically asked for you to attend." Elena blinked in confusion. "Attend? The party? I don't understand." "He was quite insistent," Mr. Patel continued, his voice apologetic but firm. "He said he met you yesterday and would like you to make an appearance, just for a short while. But I'm just housekeeping staff. I'm not dressed. For a party?" She gestured at her uniform, the plain blue dress with the hotel logo embroidered on the pocket, sensible shoes, hair still pulled back in its practical bun. The two men exchanged glances. "Mr. Blackwood is one of our most valued guests," Mr. Patel explained carefully. "His company books multiple corporate events here every year. When he makes a request, we try to accommodate." Elena understood what wasn't being said. This wasn't really a request. It was an expectation. And while they couldn't force her to go, refusing might create problems. For the hotel and possibly for her job. "It will only be for a short time," Mr. Chen added encouragingly. "Perhaps 30 minutes. Then you can go home." Elena thought of her mother waiting at home, probably already heating up the leftovers from yesterday's dinner. She thought of her bills, her rent, her mother's medication. She thought of how hard it had been to find this job, with its decent pay and manageable hours. "Okay," she finally agreed. "Let me call my mother first." 20 minutes later, Elena stood in the elevator heading up to the penthouse suite, still in her uniform despite Mr. Chen's suggestion that she might want to change. She had politely declined. If Alexander Blackwood wanted her at his party, he would get her as she was, a housekeeper who had just completed a full day's work. Campo elevator doors slid open, revealing the opulent penthouse already buzzing with activity. Waiters in crisp black and white weaved through clusters of well-dressed guests, carrying trays of champagne and elaborate appetizers. Crystal glasses clinked, expensive perfume hung in the air, and the soft notes of a string quartet provided a sophisticated soundtrack. Elena hesitated at the threshold, suddenly feeling very out of place. Perhaps she could just make a brief appearance, say hello to Mr. Blackwood and slip away before anyone really noticed her. That hope vanished when Alexander himself appeared before her, drink in hand, his expression lighting up with something that made her instantly wary. "She's here," he announced, loudly enough that several nearby conversations paused. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet someone very special." Elena felt her face flush as curious eyes turned toward her. Alexander placed his hand on her shoulder, guiding her further into the room despite her reluctance. "This is Elena Santos," he continued, his voice carrying across the space. "She works here at the hotel. I had the most fascinating encounter with her yesterday." A tall woman in a shimmering blue dress raised an eyebrow. "You're bringing the help to your party now, Alex? How progressive of you." Her tone made it clear this wasn't a compliment. Alexander smiled, unfazed. "Not just any help, Vivian. Elena here has a special interest in music." He turned to Elena. "Isn't that right?" Elena felt dozens of eyes on her, taking in her uniform, her simple appearance, the stark contrast between her and every other person in the room. Her throat felt dry. "I should go," she whispered. This was a mistake. Nonsense. Alexander tightened, his grip slightly on her shoulder. "You've only just arrived. In fact, I was hoping you might entertain us." A man with silver hair chuckled. "What, is she going to sing for us, or perhaps demonstrate proper bed-making technique?" Laughter rippled through the gathering. Elena's cheeks burned hotter. This wasn't a friendly invitation. It was some kind of cruel joke. She should have known better. Actually, Alexander replied, steering her toward the far side of the room where a gleaming, white baby grand piano sat near floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. I thought Elena might play something for us. The room quieted. Elena felt her heart pounding against her ribs. Mr. Blackwood, she said quietly but firmly. I told you yesterday I don't— Come now, he interrupted, his voice still pleasant but with an edge that hadn't been there before. Don't be modest, you said you used to play classical music. They had reached the piano now. Alexander pulled out the bench and gestured for her to sit, his expression making it clear this wasn't really a request. I haven't played in years, Elena protested, aware that the entire party had shifted to watch the uncomfortable scene unfolding. It's like riding a bicycle, isn't it? Alexander replied smoothly. One never truly forgets. He lowered his voice, so only she could hear. Indulge me, Elena. Just a little demonstration. Then you can go home to your simple life, and my guests will have had their entertainment for the evening. In that moment, Elena understood completely. This wasn't about music at all, it was about power. About a wealthy man showing his equally wealthy friends how he could command someone of a lower social class to perform on demand. It was about watching her fail and fumble, giving them all something to laugh about over their expensive drinks. Mr. Patel appeared at her side, looking concerned. Elena, is everything all right? You don't have to— It's fine, she cut in, surprising herself with her calmness. She was trapped. If she refused outright, she risked embarrassing the hotel management in front of an important client. If she admitted she couldn't really play, she'd be giving Alexander exactly what he wanted, confirmation of his assumptions about her. She sat down on the bench. Alexander's smile widened with triumph. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, a special musical interlude. Elena is going to play something classical for us. Weren't you saying you enjoyed Bach? Or perhaps it was Beethoven. I can never keep those old composers straight. More laughter. Someone near the back whispered loudly enough for Elena to hear. This should be good. Elena adjusted the bench, buying herself time. The piano keys looked back at her, white and black, familiar yet intimidating after so long. What was she doing? She should just get up and leave, job be damned. But something kept her seated. Pride, perhaps, or a deeper instinct telling her this moment mattered. Alexander watched her with growing amusement. This was going exactly as he'd hoped. The cleaning woman clearly knew nothing about playing piano. She was just staring at the keys now, frozen with embarrassment. His guests were starting to exchange knowing glances. Soon she would plink out a few childish notes or maybe chopsticks, and they would all have a good chuckle before returning to their sophisticated conversations. Any day now, called out a woman in a red dress, raising fresh laughter from the crowd. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of her mother who had sacrificed everything to give her daughter music lessons when they could barely afford rent. She thought of her old teacher, Professor Lin, who had once told her that music was the great equalizer, that when your fingers touched the keys, it didn't matter who you were or where you came from. All that mattered was what lived in your heart and flowed through your hands. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. It had been so long, years of struggle and survival with no time for music. But maybe, just maybe, Alexander leaned against the piano, drink in hand, watching with undisguised anticipation for the humiliating display he expected. The room had grown quiet, all eyes on the housekeeper in her rumpled uniform sitting at the $150,000 piano. Elena took a deep breath, and then she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major floated into the air, delicate but confident. Elena's fingers remembered what her mind had nearly forgotten, finding the keys without hesitation, bringing forth sounds of such unexpected beauty that several guests actually gasped. Alexander's smirk faded, replaced by confusion, then disbelief, as Elena continued to play. This was no fumbling attempt, no beginner's luck. This was the touch of someone who knew the piano intimately, who understood the music from somewhere deep within. As the piece progressed, Elena's initial nervousness melted away. She closed her eyes, letting herself be carried by the familiar melody, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The room around her disappeared, the staring guests, Alexander's shocked face, her own embarrassment, all of it gone, replaced by the pure joy of reconnecting with something she had loved and lost. The final notes lingered in the air, sweet and sorrowful. For a moment after she finished, the room remained utterly silent. The silence that followed Elena's performance seemed to stretch forever. She kept her eyes closed for a moment longer, not yet ready to face the room. When she finally looked up, she was met with stunned expressions on every face. Alexander stood frozen beside the piano, his champagne glass tilted dangerously in his slack grip. The smug smile that had been plastered on his face minutes earlier had vanished completely, replaced by wide-eyed astonishment. A soft sound broke the silence, a single person beginning to clap. Then another joined in and another, until the entire room erupted in enthusiastic applause. Elena blinked in surprise as the wealthy guests who had been snickering at her expense just moments ago now regarded her with genuine admiration. "My God," said the woman in the red dress who had mocked her earlier. "That was extraordinary." Elena felt her cheeks flush, but this time from an emotion far different from the humiliation she'd felt before. It had been years since anyone had heard her play, years since she'd allowed herself this pleasure. "Where did you learn to play like that?" someone called out. Before she could answer, a tall, distinguished man with wire-rimmed glasses made his way through the crowd. Unlike the others, he wasn't clapping. Instead, he studied Elena with an intensity that made her shift uncomfortably on the bench. "That technique," he said, his voice carrying authority. "The Levin method, if I'm not mistaken. I've only heard a handful of pianists who were trained in that approach." Elena nodded, surprised. "Yes, my teacher studied under Professor Levin at the conservatory." The man extended his hand. "Thomas Rivera, director of the City Philharmonic. I'd recognize that distinctive phrasing anywhere." He glanced at Alexander, who still hadn't recovered his composure. "Alex, you didn't tell me you were friends with a concert pianist." Alexander's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. Elena almost felt sorry for him as he struggled to reconcile what he'd just witnessed with his preconceived notions about her. "I'm not a concert pianist," Elena corrected gently. "Not anymore, at least. I'm a housekeeper here at the hotel." This revelation sent a fresh wave of murmurs through the crowd. Rivera's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "A housekeeper? With your talent?" He shook his head in disbelief. "That's like using a Ferrari to deliver newspapers." Elena smiled sadly. "Life doesn't always go as planned, Mr. Rivera." "Play something else," called a voice from the back of the room. Others quickly joined in with encouragement. Elena hesitated, glancing at Alexander. Despite everything, this was still his party, and the piano was not hers to command. But Alexander, seeming to finally regain his faculties, gave a small, stunned nod. "Please," he said, his voice lacking the arrogant edge it had carried all evening. "I'd like to hear more." Something in his tone made Elena study him more carefully. The mockery was gone from his eyes, replaced by what appeared to be genuine interest, maybe even a hint of remorse. It wasn't an apology, not even close, but it was something. She turned back to the keys and considered for a moment. Then, her fingers began to dance across the piano once more, this time bringing to life Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. The piece started with bold, demanding chords that instantly commanded attention. Unlike the gentle Chopin she'd played before, this selection showcased technical prowess and emotional range. As she played, Elena felt something awakening inside her, a part of herself she had buried long ago under the weight of responsibilities and hardship. Each note seemed to chip away at the walls she had built around her heart, around her dreams. The crowd watched in awe as this unassuming woman in a hotel uniform transformed before their eyes. Her back straightened, her movements became fluid and confident, her expression intense with concentration and joy. This was not someone playing at being a musician. This was an artist, reclaiming her voice. When the final thunderous chords faded, the applause was immediate and overwhelming. Elena felt slightly dizzy from the rush of emotions and adrenaline. She hadn't played that piece in its entirety since her last recital at the conservatory, nearly 7 years ago. Thomas Rivera was the first to approach her again. "Miss Santos, was it? I don't mean to be forward, but I have to ask, where did you study?" "Westbrook Conservatory," she replied. "I was there for 3 years on scholarship." "Westbrook?" Rivera looked even more surprised. "That's one of the most selective programs in the country. What happened? Why didn't you finish?" Elena's hands rested quietly in her lap now. The question brought back memories she usually tried to keep at bay. Her mother's diagnosis, the mounting medical bills, the impossible choice between her education and her family's survival. "My mother got sick," she said simply. "She needed care and we needed money. Music doesn't pay the bills when you're still a student." Rivera nodded with understanding. "And now? Is your mother—" "She's better," Elena said quickly. "Not completely well, but stable. We manage." By now Alexander had moved closer, listening to their conversation. The arrogant host from earlier was nowhere to be seen. In his place stood a man who seemed genuinely curious. "You could have said something," he told Elena, his voice low. "Yesterday when I asked if you played." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Would it have mattered? You had already decided who I was the moment you saw my uniform." Alexander had the grace to look ashamed. "Yes, I suppose I did." The party had begun to recover from the unexpected interlude. Guests returned to their conversations, though many kept glancing at Elena with newfound respect. A few approached to compliment her playing or ask questions about her training. Mr. Patel, who had witnessed the entire scene from near the entrance, caught Elena's eye and gave her an encouraging smile and a subtle thumbs up. Whatever had started as an uncomfortable situation had somehow turned into something quite different. "Ms. Santos," Rivera said, reaching into his jacket pocket and producing a business card. "I don't know if you're interested, but we have a special concert series coming up next month, Hidden Talents of the City. It was designed to showcase exceptional musicians who, for whatever reason, haven't found their way to traditional performance careers. We would be honored if you would consider participating." Elena stared at the card in shock. "You want me to play? In a real concert?" "With the Philharmonic, yes." Rivera smiled. "It wouldn't pay much for a single performance, I'm afraid, but it could open doors." Elena's mind raced. Could she do it? After all these years? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She hadn't practiced seriously in so long. Her technique would need work. She would need access to a piano for regular practice sessions. As if reading her thoughts, Alexander suddenly spoke up. "The hotel has 3 pianos, including the one in the ballroom. I'm sure arrangements could be made for Ms. Santos to practice during off hours." He looked at Mr. Patel, who nodded quickly. Of course, we would be delighted to support one of our own." Elena felt overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. Just hours ago, she had been finishing her shift, looking forward to nothing more exciting than leftover pasta with her mother. Now she was being offered a chance to play with the Philharmonic, with practice time on a grand piano. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say yes," urged a woman nearby who had been listening. "We'd all come to hear you play." Several others murmured agreement. Elena looked at Rivera's card, then at the piano, then at the expectant faces around her. Something tight in her chest began to loosen, a knot of resignation that had been there for so long she'd stopped noticing it. "I would need time to prepare," she said cautiously. "It's been years since I performed properly." "The concert is 6 weeks away," Rivera replied. "Is that enough time?" Elena thought about her schedule, her responsibilities. It would mean less sleep, arranging coverage for some shifts, asking neighbors to check on her mother during practice sessions. It would be hard, but not impossible. "Yes," she said finally, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes, I think it is." The crowd broke into applause again, this time celebrating not just her talent but her decision. In the midst of it all, Elena found herself looking at Alexander, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said quietly, so only he could hear. He shook his head. "Don't thank me. I invited you here to humiliate you, not to help you." "I know," Elena replied. "But sometimes good things come from bad intentions." Alexander considered this for a moment, then nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps they do." As the evening continued around them, something shifted between the wealthy businessman and the housekeeper. Not friendship exactly, but a kind of understanding. Sometimes life's most significant turning points arrive in the most unexpected packages. For Elena, it had come in the form of a cruel joke that had backfired spectacularly, opening a door she had thought closed forever. The following weeks brought more changes to Elena's life than she had experienced in years. After her impromptu performance at Alexander's party, word spread quickly throughout the hotel. Suddenly, staff members who had barely noticed her before were stopping her in hallways to ask about her music. Mr. Patel had formally approved her use of the ballroom piano during off hours, arranging her cleaning schedule to allow practice time in the mornings before the space was needed for events. "I can't believe this is happening," Elena told her mother as they sat at their small kitchen table, sharing a simple dinner of chicken soup and bread. "Sometimes I think I might wake up and find it was all a dream." Lucia Santos smiled at her daughter, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Though illness had taken its toll, leaving her thinner and more fragile than she once was, her warm expression still held the strength that had carried them through their hardest times. "Not a dream, Mejia. A second chance." She reached across the table to squeeze Elena's hand. "I always told you that your music would find its way back to you." Elena nodded, feeling a rush of emotion. "I know, Mama. I just wish it hadn't taken so long." "Everything happens when it should," Lucia replied with the quiet wisdom that had guided them both. "Not a minute sooner, not a minute later." The next morning, Elena arrived at the hotel earlier than usual. The grand ballroom was eerily quiet. At 5:30 a.m., the first hints of dawn just beginning to lighten the tall windows. She moved through the familiar space, turning on only the minimum lighting needed to see the piano. This had become her ritual over the past 2 weeks. These precious hours of solitude before the world awoke, reconnecting with the music that had once been the center of her life. She set her worn leather folder of sheet music on the piano, the pages inside dog-eared and marked with notes from her student days. Rivera had suggested several pieces for the upcoming concert, but had ultimately left the final selection to her. After much consideration, she had chosen Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 8 in C minor, the Pathétique. It was technically demanding, but deeply emotional, a piece that spoke of struggle and resilience, qualities Elena understood all too well. She began with scales and exercises, warming up fingers that had grown stronger with each day of practice. The muscle memory was returning, along with the calluses on her fingertips that she had once worn as badges of honor. When she finally turned to the sonata, she lost herself in the music, playing through the difficult passages again and again, sometimes stopping to work on a particularly challenging sequence. "You're rushing the adagio." Elena's hands froze on the keys. She hadn't heard anyone enter, but Alexander Blackwood now stood near the piano, hands in the pockets of his expensive suit, watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Mr. Blackwood, I didn't know you were still staying at the hotel." She straightened her posture, acutely aware of her simple jeans and sweater, her practice clothes, not her work uniform, but still worlds away from his tailored appearance. "I extended my stay," he said simply, "and please call me Alexander. I think we're past formalities after—" He gestured vaguely, seeming to reference the entire odd situation that had brought them to this point. Elena nodded, but didn't reply, unsure of what to make of his presence or his comment about her playing. "You don't believe me," Alexander said, moving closer to the piano. "About rushing the adagio." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." A hint of his old arrogance flashed across his face, but it quickly softened into something more thoughtful. My mother was a pianist, not professionally, but she studied seriously for many years. That piece was one of her favorites. This unexpected glimpse into his personal life caught Elena off guard. In the weeks since the party, she had seen Alexander occasionally in the hotel, and they had exchanged polite nods, but nothing more. She hadn't sought him out, and he hadn't approached her until now. "Would you mind?" he asked, gesturing to the bench. After a moment's hesitation, Elena slid over, making room for him. Alexander sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, and placed his hands on the keys. To her surprise, he began to play the opening of the adagio with reasonable skill, not with the technical proficiency of a trained musician, but with understanding and sensitivity. "Like this," he said, demonstrating the tempo he meant. "Let it breathe. These notes need space between them." Elena watched his hands, noticing the contrast between them, his manicured and unmarked, hers, showing the signs of both her music and her work as a housekeeper. Yet in this moment they were simply two people sharing a piece of music. "You play," she said, genuinely surprised. Alexander smiled slightly. "Not really. Not like you. I learned as a child because it was expected, like tennis and French. I never had the passion for it, or the talent." He removed his hands from the keys. "But I know this piece well enough to hear when someone's not giving the adagio its due respect." Elena found herself returning his smile. "Fair enough." She positioned her hands and played the section again, this time paying careful attention to the tempo, allowing the notes to linger in the air before moving to the next phrase. "Better." Alexander nodded when she finished. "Much better." They sat in silence for a moment, the last notes still seeming to hover in the air around them. "Why are you here, Mr. Black?" "Alexander?" Elena finally asked. "Surely you're not just wandering the hotel at dawn critiquing people's piano playing." He laughed, the sound surprisingly genuine. "No, though that might be an interesting hobby." His expression grew more serious. "Actually, I was looking for you. The hotel staff mentioned you practice here in the mornings." Elena raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "I wanted to apologize," he said, the words coming out with some difficulty. "Properly apologize, I mean. What I did at the party was cruel and thoughtless. I made assumptions about you based on nothing but my own prejudice, and I tried to use you for entertainment at your expense." He met her eyes directly. "I'm sorry, Elena." The apology surprised her almost as much as his unexpected musical knowledge had. In her experience, men like Alexander Blackwood rarely admitted they were wrong about anything. "Thank you," she said simply. "I appreciate that." "I've also been thinking," he continued, seeming encouraged by her response, "about what Rivera said regarding your situation at the conservatory." Elena tensed slightly. Her financial circumstances weren't something she enjoyed discussing, especially not with someone who had likely never worried about money a day in his life. "I'd like to help," Alexander said. "I've established a music scholarship at Westbrook for students who have to leave their studies due to financial hardship or family obligations." Elena stared at him, processing what he was saying. "A scholarship?" Alexander nodded. "It will cover tuition, housing, and provide a stipend for living, expenses, and family care. The selection committee will prioritize students with exceptional talent who had to interrupt their education due to circumstances beyond their control." He paused. "I'm calling it the Elena Santos Second Chance Scholarship." Elena felt her throat tighten with emotion. Of all the things she had expected from this conversation, this hadn't even been on the list of possibilities. "Why?" she managed to ask. Alexander looked down at the piano keys, running his finger lightly along their edge. "Because what happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone with your gift. Music like yours. It belongs in the world." He glanced up at her. "And because I needed to do something meaningful with my money for once, instead of just hosting parties, to impress people I don't even like." Elena was speechless. The scholarship wouldn't change her past, Wouldn't give her back the years she'd lost, but it might prevent someone else from facing the same impossible choice she had. "Thank you," she said finally, the words inadequate for what she was feeling. "That's incredibly generous." Alexander shrugged, suddenly looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's the least I could do. Besides, it's good PR for my company." Elena wasn't fooled by his attempt to downplay the gesture, but she let it pass. "Still, thank you." He nodded, then stood up from the bench. "I should let you get back to your practice. The concert is only a few weeks away and you're still rushing the adagio." This time, Elena laughed. "I'll work on it." Alexander moved toward the door but paused before leaving. "One more thing. Rivera mentioned that you might need a suitable dress for the performance. I took the liberty of arranging an appointment for you at Madeleine's boutique downtown. They're expecting you this afternoon at 3. Everything has been taken care of." "That's not necessary," Elena began to protest. "Please," Alexander interrupted. "Consider it part of my apology." After he left, Elena sat quietly at the piano for several minutes, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The man who had tried to humiliate her was now funding a scholarship in her name and buying her a dress for her concert debut. Life had certainly taken an unexpected turn. She turned back to her music, finding her place in the score. As she began to play again, she made a conscious effort to slow down during the adagio, giving each note the space it deserved. Sometimes, she realized, we all need to be reminded to slow down, to breathe, to allow life's music to unfold at its own perfect pace. The night of the concert arrived more quickly than Elena could have imagined. 6 weeks of intensive practice had flown by in a blur of early mornings at the piano, adjusted work schedules, and moments of both doubt and exhilaration. Now, as she stood backstage at the city concert hall, her heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone around her could hear it. "5 minutes, Ms. Santos," the stage manager said, poking his head into the small dressing room where Elena sat trying to calm her nerves. She nodded, unable to form words. The elegant burgundy dress Alexander had arranged for her rustled softly as she stood to check her appearance one last time in the mirror. The gown was unlike anything she had ever worn, simple yet sophisticated, with a subtle shimmer that caught the light when she moved. Her dark hair was swept up in a classic style that her neighbor Rosita, a former hairdresser, had insisted on doing for her special night. "You look beautiful," said a familiar voice from the doorway. Elena turned to see her mother being wheeled into the room by Nora from the hotel. Lucia Santos wore her best dress and a proud smile that outshone any fancy clothing. "Mama?" Elena rushed to embrace her. "I didn't think you were coming until later. How did you get here so early?" "Mr. Blackwood sent a car," Lucia explained, holding her daughter's hands tightly. "He arranged everything. The driver, the special entrance for the wheelchair, even these." She gestured to the front row tickets pinned securely in her purse. Elena wasn't entirely surprised. Over the past weeks, Alexander had continued to show up in unexpected ways, arranging for a piano tuner to check the hotel's grand piano before each of her practice sessions, sending sheet music he thought might interest her, even attending a few of her rehearsals with the Philharmonic when his schedule allowed. They had developed an unusual friendship, one based on mutual respect that had grown from the most unlikely beginning. "Are you nervous?" Lucia asked, studying her daughter's face. "Terrified," Elena admitted with a shaky laugh. "I keep thinking I'll walk out there and forget every note I've ever learned." "That won't happen," her mother said firmly. "The music is part of you, mihija. It always has been." There was a soft knock at the door, and Thomas Rivera appeared. "Almost time, Elena. The house is packed." He smiled encouragingly. "No pressure, but the governor is out there along with half the city's arts patrons." Elena felt her stomach drop. "Is that supposed to help with my nerves?" Rivera laughed. "Just being honest. But I've heard you play, remember? You're going to amaze them." He nodded respectfully to Lucia. "Mrs. Santos, it's an honor to meet you. Your daughter is remarkable." "Yes," Lucia agreed, looking at Elena with eyes full of love. "She always has been." Another knock, more insistent this time. "2 minutes!" called the stage manager. "I should find my seat," Lucia said, squeezing Elena's hand one more time. "Remember what your first teacher told you? Play from the heart, and the fingers will follow." Elena finished, the old advice bringing back warm memories. She bent to kiss her mother's cheek. "I love you, Mama." "I love you too. Now go show them who Elena Santos really is." As Nora wheeled Lucia out toward the seating area, Rivera offered Elena his arm. "Ready?" She took a deep breath and nodded, "As ready as I'll ever be." They walked through the backstage area toward the wings of the main stage. Elena could hear the murmur of the audience, the occasional cough or rustle of programs. The sounds grew louder as they approached, along with the flutter of anxiety in her chest. "Remember," Rivera said quietly, "these people came because they heard about the housekeeper with extraordinary talent. They're already on your side." Elena nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. As they reached the edge of the stage, she peered out at the audience. The concert hall was indeed full. The lights dimmed now as people settled into their seats in anticipation. In the front row, she could see her mother being positioned in her wheelchair in the special accessible space. Next to her was Alexander, elegant in a tuxedo, leaning over to say something that made Lucia smile. Seeing them together, her mother who had sacrificed everything for her, and the man whose cruelty had unexpectedly opened a door back to her, music gave Elena a sudden sense of calm. Whatever happened in the next hour, she had people who believed in her. The concertmaster appeared on stage, and the orchestra members stood as Rivera walked out to enthusiastic applause. He addressed the audience briefly, explaining the hidden talents concept and introducing Elena with words that made her blush even in the shadows of the wings. A remarkable story of talent rediscovered, and a reminder that extraordinary gifts can be found in the most unexpected places. Ladies and gentlemen, in her concert debut, Ms. Elena Santos. The stage manager nodded to her, and Elena walked out into the light. The applause that greeted her was warm and welcoming. She made her way to the gleaming grand piano at center stage, her burgundy dress catching the lights as she moved. She acknowledged the audience with a small bow, then settled herself at the bench, adjusting it slightly to her preferred position. For a moment, she sat completely still, gathering herself. The hall was silent now, hundreds of people waiting for her to begin. She caught Alexander's eye in the front row. He gave her a small nod, not of permission, but of confidence. Beside him, her mother's face shone with pride. Elena placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The opening notes of Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata filled the concert hall, the powerful dramatic chords setting the tone for what was to come. As she moved through the first movement, Elena felt the last of her nerves dissolve, replaced by the pure joy of making music again in a space designed for it, with an audience who had come specifically to hear her play. She thought of the strange journey that had brought her here, from the conservatory student she had once been, to the housekeeper struggling to support her mother, to this moment on stage. Each experience had shaped her, adding depth and understanding to her playing that hadn't been there in her youth. When she reached the adagio, she remembered Alexander's advice and let the notes breathe, filling each phrase with the emotion it deserved. The music spoke of longing, of hardship, but also of beauty found within struggle, a perfect reflection of her own path. By the time she reached the final movement, Elena was no longer thinking about technique or the audience or anything but the music itself. Her fingers flew across the keys, bringing the piece to its powerful conclusion with confidence and passion. The final chord hung in the air for a perfect moment of silence before the audience erupted in applause. Elena remained seated, momentarily overwhelmed by what had just happened, until Rivera appeared at her side, encouraging her to stand and acknowledge the response. As she rose and turned to face the audience, she was startled to see people rising to their feet, the applause growing even louder. A standing ovation. For her, Elena Santos, who just weeks ago had been invisible to most of these same people, now stood in the spotlight receiving their appreciation. She bowed deeply, emotion tightening her throat. When she straightened, her eyes found her mother in the front row, tears streaming down Lucia's face as she clapped with all her strength. Beside her, Alexander was on his feet, his usual reserve replaced by genuine enthusiasm as he applauded her performance. Elena took another bow, then gestured toward the orchestra in acknowledgement of their support. Rivera approached with a bouquet of flowers, presenting them to her with a wide smile and a whispered, "Magnificent." As the applause finally began to subside, Rivera stepped forward to address the audience again, but was interrupted by a voice from the front row. "If I may," Alexander said, standing and turning to face the crowd. Rivera, surprised but intrigued, nodded and handed him the microphone. "For those who don't know me, I'm Alexander Blackwood," he began, "and I have a brief announcement that I think will interest everyone here tonight." Elena watched him curiously, having no idea what he was about to say. Tonight, we've all had the privilege of witnessing extraordinary talent that might have remained hidden, if not for a chance encounter. Alexander glanced at Elena with a smile. That encounter, I'm somewhat embarrassed to admit, involved me behaving rather badly. A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. What began as an attempt to mock someone I wrongly judged has instead taught me a valuable lesson about assumptions, privilege, and the incredible potential that exists in every person, regardless of their current circumstances. He paused, his expression growing more serious. That's why, in addition to the scholarship program already established in Ms. Santos's name at Westbrook Conservatory, I am announcing tonight the creation of the Second Chance Foundation. Murmurs spread through the audience as Alexander continued. This foundation will identify gifted musicians who have had to abandon their training due to financial hardship or family obligations and provide them with the support needed to return to their studies or launch professional careers. Ms. Santos has graciously agreed to serve on the selection committee, bringing her unique perspective and expertise to the process. Elena stared at him in shock. This was the first she had heard of any foundation. Alexander caught her eye and gave her a small, almost apologetic shrug for the surprise announcement. The foundation will begin accepting applications next month and will be fully funded for the next 20 years. He turned to look directly at Elena now. Because talent like Mrs. Santos's deserves to be heard, and no one should have to choose between their gifts and their responsibilities. The audience broke into fresh applause as Alexander handed the microphone back to Rivera and returned to his seat. Elena barely heard what Rivera said next about upcoming performances and acknowledgments. Her mind was spinning with the implications of what had just been announced. How many lives might be changed, how many musicians might find their way back to their art. As she made her final bow and left the stage, Elena felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with humiliation had transformed into something beautiful beyond imagination. The circle had closed, the music had returned, and somewhere in the process the rich man who had tried to mock her had found his own kind of redemption, turning arrogance into purpose and cruelty into compassion. Sometimes, Elena thought as she walked backstage to the continued applause, life writes the most unexpected melodies of all.